30 seconds. That is how quickly everything can change. One moment, you are carrying a question that has followed you for months, maybe even years. The next moment, the answer arrives in a way you never expected. And the words written across the final page are these: your case is closed. But before fear enters your heart, understand this: closed does not always mean defeated. Sometimes a case is closed because the battle has finally ended. Sometimes a door closes because you were never supposed to spend another night standing outside it. And sometimes the chapter that exhausted you is sealed because a completely different chapter is ready to begin. So hear this message as a spiritual reflection, because the most shocking part isn't that the case is closed. It's why. You thought you were waiting for an answer. But perhaps all this time, you were being prepared for what would happen after the answer arrived. There are seasons when life feels like a courtroom. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every disappointment feels like another accusation. Every rejection sounds like a verdict. You replay conversations. You remember people who walked away. You wonder why certain doors refuse to open. And eventually, you begin asking yourself a dangerous question. What if nothing is ever going to change? But imagine this. Imagine heaven looking at the very situation you believed was unfinished and saying, enough. No more carrying yesterday into tomorrow. No more allowing an old wound to decide what you deserve. No more giving people from your past permanent authority over your future. The case is closed. And suddenly, the phrase that frightened you becomes the phrase that sets you free. Because there was something you didn't know. The delay wasn't necessarily rejection. The silence wasn't necessarily abandonment. And the ending wasn't necessarily punishment. Sometimes an ending is protection wearing unfamiliar clothes. Think about what you've survived. There were moments you thought would destroy you. There were nights when your mind refused to become quiet. There were mornings when you smiled because nobody around you knew how tired you really were. Yet somehow, you continued. You learned. You changed. You became more careful about who received access to your heart. You started recognizing patterns you once ignored. And without realizing it, you became someone your former struggles could no longer control. That's why this moment matters. Because the case that is closing isn't merely about what happened to you. It is about who you became because you refused to remain there. But now comes the revelation. You cannot keep asking God to open a new chapter while repeatedly reopening the evidence from the old one. You cannot walk into tomorrow while holding yesterday's courtroom transcript against your chest. There comes a moment when you must decide. Will I continue proving that I was hurt? Or will I begin discovering who I can become after healing? Those are two very different lives. And perhaps that is why these words reached you today. Your case is closed. Not because your story is over. Because the investigation into whether you are worthy of another beginning is over. You don't need another person's approval to become who you were created to become. You don't need someone who rejected you to suddenly understand your value. You don't need everyone who misunderstood you to return with an apology. And you certainly don't need to spend the next 5 years waiting for somebody else to give you permission to live again. That realization changes everything. Because many people aren't trapped by what happened. They're trapped by waiting for what happened to be corrected. They wait for the apology. They wait for recognition. They wait for the person who left to regret leaving. They wait for someone to finally say, "You were right." But what if your freedom begins when you no longer need the verdict of the people who hurt you? What if closure doesn't arrive through their mouth? What if closure begins inside you? That's where this becomes urgent. Because an opportunity can appear while you're still staring backward. A good person can enter your life while you're still emotionally arguing with somebody who left years ago. A new door can open while you're still knocking on the old one. A peaceful season can begin while you're still addicted to chaos. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake peace for emptiness simply because you've become accustomed to storms. Listen carefully. Not everything leaving your life deserves to be chased. Not every closed door deserves another knock. Not every unanswered question deserves another sleepless night. There are things you may never completely understand. And still, you can move forward. That is strength. But there is another reason this case is closing. And this one might surprise you. Some of the things you were praying to receive earlier would have overwhelmed the version of you who existed then. You wanted the opportunity before you had the discipline. You wanted the relationship before you understood boundaries. You wanted recognition before you knew how to survive criticism. You wanted abundance before you learned how to protect your peace. So what felt like delay may have been development. While you were asking, "Why isn't it happening?" life was asking, "Who are you becoming?" And perhaps the answer matters more than the timeline. Because receiving something isn't the same as being ready to keep it. There are blessings that require maturity. Opportunities that require courage. Relationships that require emotional stability. Responsibilities that require patience. And doors that should not open until you are strong enough to walk through them without abandoning yourself. Maybe that's what these last months have been doing. Teaching you not to beg. Teaching you not to chase. Teaching you that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Teaching you that losing access to certain people can sometimes restore access to yourself. Teaching you that peace is expensive and sometimes the price is walking away. Your case is closed. But your future isn't. In fact, perhaps your future is finally being released from the argument you've been having with your past. And now another page turns. Picture yourself standing in a long hallway. Behind you are dozens of doors. One says betrayal. Another says rejection. Another says regret. Another says, what could have been. Another carries the name of somebody you once thought would remain forever. For years, you've walked back down that hallway checking those doors. Maybe this one will open again. Maybe this person will change. Maybe this situation will somehow become what I wanted. But today you notice something. There is another door ahead. You've barely looked at it because you've spent so much time facing backward. There is no dramatic writing on this door. No painful memory attached to it. Only one word. Next. And suddenly you understand. Your greatest opportunity may not be hidden inside something you're trying to recover. It may be waiting inside something you've never experienced. That's the revelation. Your next season doesn't have to resemble your previous one. Your next relationship doesn't have to repeat your previous heartbreak. Your next opportunity doesn't have to end like the one you lost. Your next decision doesn't have to be controlled by an old mistake. History can teach you without becoming your prophecy. And perhaps somebody listening needs that sentence more than anything else. Your history can teach you without becoming your prophecy. You are allowed to learn and still expect better. You are allowed to remember and still move forward. You are allowed to forgive without reopening access. You are allowed to love someone and recognize that they cannot accompany you into your next chapter. You are allowed to outgrow environments you once prayed to enter. And you are allowed to become unfamiliar to people who only knew the wounded version of you. The case is closed. But there is one piece of evidence you should keep. Look at yourself. You are still here. After everything you thought would finish you, you are still here. Maybe changed. Maybe tired. Maybe more cautious. But still here. And that means the story didn't end where you thought it would. Now imagine what could happen if you stopped spending your energy trying to understand every loss and started investing that energy into building what comes next. Imagine waking tomorrow without checking whether somebody noticed your absence. Imagine no longer needing revenge because your peace became more valuable. Imagine hearing someone's name and feeling nothing but gratitude for what the experience taught you. Imagine looking at the door that closed and finally saying, "I understand why I couldn't stay there." That is closure. Not forgetting. Not pretending it never hurt. Not denying what happened. Closure is remembering without surrendering your future to the memory. And that is where the countdown matters. 30 seconds doesn't have to be a literal clock. It can represent a decision. Sometimes transformation begins in less than 30 seconds. It takes seconds to say, "I'm done chasing. I'm done begging. I'm done explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I'm done returning to situations that repeatedly destroy my peace. I'm done treating rejection like proof that I'm worthless. I'm done carrying guilt for becoming someone stronger. I'm done waiting for permission." And once that decision becomes real, an entire chapter can end. But here's what happens next. The moment you release something, your mind may try to bring it back. You'll remember the good moments. You'll wonder whether you were too harsh. You'll question whether you should try one more time. That's normal. Because familiar pain can sometimes feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. You know the rules of the old situation. You know how disappointment works there. You know what to expect. But the future? The future requires trust. And trust can feel terrifying when you've been disappointed before. Still, you have to walk. Because there are places you cannot reach while constantly turning around. There are people you cannot meet while emotionally unavailable. There are opportunities you cannot recognize while comparing everything to what you lost. And there is peace you cannot experience while rehearsing arguments that ended long ago. So close the file. Put down the evidence. Release the imaginary jury. Stop prosecuting yourself for choices made by an earlier version of you who knew less than you know today. Learn from that person. Forgive that person. Then become someone new. Because here comes another revelation. Maybe the person you've been waiting to become isn't arriving someday. Maybe that person is created through the decision you're making right now. Courage doesn't always arrive before action. Sometimes courage appears because you acted while afraid. Confidence doesn't always arrive before the opportunity. Sometimes confidence is built because you accepted the opportunity despite your uncertainty. Healing doesn't always arrive before you move forward. Sometimes healing happens because you finally started moving. That's why you cannot remain frozen until everything makes sense. Some answers only become visible from the other side of the door. And there is a door ahead of you. Perhaps it looks ordinary. A conversation. An application. A new routine. A boundary. A goodbye. A beginning. A decision you've delayed. But ordinary decisions can produce extraordinary changes. One phone call can change a career. One honest conversation can change a relationship. One boundary can change your emotional life. One decision to stop returning can break a pattern that lasted years. One decision to begin again can rewrite an entire future. Never underestimate the power of a single moment. Your case is closed. And you won't believe why. Because perhaps the case was never about proving whether you deserved another chance. Maybe the real question was whether you would finally give yourself one. You kept waiting for someone else to choose you. Now choose yourself. You kept waiting for someone else to recognize your worth. Now live like you recognize it. You kept waiting for somebody else to bring peace into your life. Now protect the peace already trying to grow inside you. And if faith is important to you, bring this moment to God not with panic, but with trust. Say, guide me toward what is good. Give me wisdom to recognize what I should release. Give me courage to accept what I cannot control. Help me learn without becoming bitter. Help me forgive without losing discernment. Help me walk forward without needing every answer first. Because faith isn't pretending nothing difficult will happen. Faith is believing difficulty doesn't get the final word. And neither does rejection. Neither does betrayal. Neither does embarrassment. Neither does the mistake you still think about at night. Neither does the opportunity you missed. Neither does the person who walked away. Neither does the year that didn't go according to plan. None of those things receive permanent authority over your story unless you hand it to them. So take the pen back. Write differently. You survived chapters you never wanted. Now create chapters you actually choose. Choose peace. Choose discipline. Choose relationships where respect doesn't have to be begged for. Choose opportunities that challenge you without destroying you. Choose environments where you don't have to shrink to remain accepted. Choose honesty. Choose patience. Choose growth. And understand this. A closed case creates empty space. At first, empty space can feel uncomfortable. You may call it loneliness. You may call it uncertainty. But empty space can also become possibility. When the wrong thing leaves, there is finally room. Room for better habits. Room for better conversations. Room for better people. Room for rest. Room for creativity. Room for faith. Room for you. And maybe that's why this ending had to happen. Not because everything behind you was meaningless, but because everything ahead of you needs space. There is something powerful about reaching the point where you no longer need to hate what happened. You can simply say, "It taught me." The rejection taught you. The delay taught you. The silence taught you. The heartbreak taught you. The wrong door taught you what the right door should feel like. The wrong people taught you what healthy love should not require. Your mistakes taught you humility. Your recovery taught you strength. And your waiting taught you patience. None of it had to be wasted. But now the lesson is complete. You don't keep repeating a class after you've passed it. So why keep repeating emotional patterns whose lesson you already understand? That person who appears only when they need something. Lesson learned. That opportunity requiring you to betray your values. Lesson learned. That habit that steals tomorrow's peace for today's temporary comfort. Lesson learned. That voice inside your head telling you you're permanently defined by one mistake. Lesson learned. Close the case. And now there is only one final question. When the next door opens, will you walk through it as the person you were? Or as the person you've become? Because you have changed. Even if nobody applauded it. Even if nobody noticed. Even if your progress happened quietly. You know what you no longer tolerate. You know which battles aren't worth fighting. You know which conversations don't deserve your energy. You know how expensive peace becomes once you've lived without it. And that wisdom is valuable. Protect it. The next chapter doesn't need the old version of you. It needs the wiser one. The calmer one. The one who understands that urgency isn't the same as importance. The one who doesn't make permanent decisions from temporary emotions. The one who knows that real love doesn't require constant confusion. The one who knows that every opportunity isn't meant to be accepted. The one who understands that saying no can sometimes be an act of faith. This version of you is ready for different things. And different things require different choices. So when somebody from the past knocks again, don't only remember how much you missed them. Remember why you needed healing. When an old opportunity returns, don't only remember how badly you wanted it. Ask whether it still fits the person you've become. When fear tells you to stay small, remember how much you've already survived. And when uncertainty whispers, what if everything goes wrong? Answer with another question. What if something finally goes right? What if the ending was clearing the path? What if losing that door redirected you? What if the delay strengthened you? What if the silence taught you to hear your own wisdom? What if the person who walked away created space for somebody capable of staying? What if the opportunity that disappeared forced you toward one better aligned with your gifts? You don't know yet. And that's exactly why the next chapter deserves a chance. 30 seconds. The clock reaches 0. The room becomes silent. The final document is placed before you. You look down expecting another accusation. Another delay. Another reason to worry. Instead, you see one sentence. The case is closed. And underneath it, you are free to move forward. No chains. No courtroom. No audience deciding your value. Just an open door. You stand. You take one final look behind you. Not with hatred. Not with regret. With gratitude. Because even though you would never choose some of those painful moments again, they taught you things comfort never could. Then you turn around. And there it is. The door marked next. This time, you don't ask whether you're worthy. You don't ask whether everyone will understand. You don't ask whether the people behind you approve. You simply reach for the handle. And before you open it, remember this. You don't need to know everything waiting on the other side. You only need enough courage for the next step. One step. Then another. Then another. That is how lives change. Not always through one enormous miracle. Sometimes through hundreds of quiet decisions to keep walking. And maybe that is the real message hidden inside this urgent moment. Your greatest breakthrough might not be something arriving. It might be something finally ending. The obsession ends. The chasing ends. The self-doubt ends. The need for approval ends. The argument with yesterday ends. And when those things end, something extraordinary begins. Peace. Clarity. Self-respect. Possibility. A future that no longer has to ask permission from your past. So don't mourn every closed case. Some endings are answers. Some goodbyes are protection. Some delays are preparation. Some closed doors are direction. And some moments that initially feel like loss become the exact turning point you later thank God for. Your case is closed. Not your purpose. Not your hope. Not your future. Not your ability to begin again. The case is closed because you cannot build your next life while constantly defending your previous one. The case is closed because you've learned what you needed to learn. The case is closed because yesterday has testified enough. Now tomorrow gets to speak. And perhaps tomorrow will say, "Welcome."